Well, good afternoon. We continue to roll out discovery groups, and I want to continue providing some training on how to do these groups well. Today, what I want to talk about is leading a meeting well by setting an example of giving thoughtful, concise answers to the questions in the discovery group. We've talked about this before, that the role of a leader in a discovery group, it's to facilitate discussion. It's not to teach, it's not to exhort, it's to facilitate people working through these. Now, there may be times to teach and exhort, but really your role as a leader is to facilitate each person answering the questions. What I want to talk about today is giving thoughtful reflection to those answers. You know, we've all been in different groups. Some people have been in small groups that are relationally driven, and it provides an opportunity to share your feelings and your thoughts on a variety of topics, and you want everybody to know exactly what's going on in your life at that moment. Others have been in small groups that are Bible study oriented, and you talk about every detail of the text and want to make sure you don't miss anything on it. Other people have been in more groups that are more accountability driven, and you want to challenge and exhort each person in the group, kind of find out where their problem is and challenge them in that area. That's not what discovery groups are. Discovery groups are intended to invite people into a process of knowing others, of reading God's Word and asking the questions, what does God's Word say? What do I need to do? And what do I need to share? It's a process, and people are going to feel the effect of this process as they get through all the questions. And so trying to get through all the questions, or at a minimum, each section of the questions, the sections of what does God's Word say? What do I do? What do I share? It's important to do that. And for that to happen, we need to make sure we're not dominating conversation or going off on a teaching tangent or an exhortation tangent or a relational tangent of let me tell you everything that's going on in life. And so as a leader, I want to challenge you to really give thoughtful answers to the questions that are there. Let me give an example of this. A couple weeks ago, we did, in the men's group, we studied Hosea. Hosea is called to go and buy back his wife that has left him, that has forsaken him, and he's to bring her back to himself. It's a picture of God's grace. As we read this passage, we're immediately aware of that God is gracious. God is great, far more gracious than we can ever imagine. We also see that people do wrong things in life. They reject him, they reject us, and we see that we are called to be gracious to others, to love them. And this is just such an incredible picture of what God calls us to do. Now, as we talked about what God's Word says, then the next stage was, what do we do? And this can be a challenging part for some people. You know, sometimes we come and we've had a rough day at the office. Maybe we haven't been working as hard as we like, so we just kind of put our to-do, well, I need to work harder. Well, that may be appropriate, but we just read God's Word, and it may leave people scratching their head. Well, what does this have to do with this passage that we read? As we talk about our what do we do, or our I wills, we want that to come out of God's Word. We want God's Word to shape us. We want what we just read to shape us. And so we want to give thoughtful reflection. I just read this passage. What does God call me to do with it? I've seen His grace. What do I do? What do I go out and be obedient to? Well, we had a great discussion on this as men. Some of the guys just shared, well, God is gracious. You know what? I need to be gracious to people around me. That's good, but how do we get more specific? And that's where one guy was able to say, you know what? I need to be gracious. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to raise my voice with my children this week. I want to make sure I'm being gracious and loving to them in everything. That was just an amazing observation, and it opened it up to several other guys of needing to do the same thing and just seeing how we can live out God's calling in our lives. Others sharing, well, I want to be more gracious to someone, a neighbor that is difficult to be around. Really opens up how we live out God's Word and commands. And it was just people giving thoughtful reflection on the passage and thoughtful reflection on what do I need to do. And that opened up the share question as we talked about, well, who can I share this with? We thought, well, who isn't around difficult people? Who doesn't have a hard time raising their voice with their kids? What a great opportunity to be hanging out with a friend or neighbor and say, you know, man, I was in a Bible study and it's reading about God's grace and just how profound it is. And it just encouraged me that I want to be gracious to my kids. And so I'm working hard to not raise my voice with them, to not be angry at them. It's just an incredible time of seeing how God's grace, God's word, it shapes us, it changes us, it encourages us. And so just want to encourage you to do that in your discovery group meeting. Give thoughtful reflection on God's word, what it means, what you need to do, and who you can share it with. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this encourages you, gives you some guidance on how to lead your next discovery group, and just that you will encounter God's grace in your group. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you later.